Welcome, everybody. Really glad you are all able to be here today. So I have the great honor of introducing Audrey Anastasi and giving you a little bit of her background, which is very impressive. So Audrey Frank Anastasi is a curator, a gallery owner and director. She's an arts educator and an arts advocate, but we have to remember that above all else, she is a dedicated working artist with an extensive history of showing her work in the US and abroad. Audrey got her master's in fine art at Pratt Institute and afterwards taught figure drawing, portfolio development, and anatomy for artists at Parsons. Audrey's been featured on NPR, in the New York Times, the Daily News, AM New York, the New York Observer, and more. She and her husband, Frank, Joseph, I'm sorry. I always think that because of your middle name. So Audrey and Joseph are co-founders and directors of Tabula Rasa Art Gallery, which was the first art gallery in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. And in 2008, the Brooklyn Arts Council honored Audrey and Joseph's pioneering work and their dedication to supporting fellow artists. Anastasi is a member of the Brooklyn Arts Council's Board of Directors and was president of BWAC, the Brooklyn Waterfront Artists Coalition, from 1999 to 2004. She's also, of course, an active member of the New York Artists Circle. Now, Audrey prefers to work from direct observation and works rapidly, but in 1990, she began painting with her non-dominant left hand, and accepting this challenge of the new struggle enabled her work to intuitively respect the spontaneity of the paint stroke and to redirect her attention to the soul of the subject matter. And that brings us right into why we're here today, which is to talk about the work in her show, Refugee. Audrey's work addresses global upheaval from political strife, warfare, and natural disasters, and ensuing human migration that is a result of that. Her powerful works really portray these tragedies with intensity and sensitivity. Lois and I visited her exhibition, Refugee, in person at Brooklyn College last fall. The show included many of her passport-sized works on the theme of displacement and migration, but it also consisted, well, the core of the show is these 4 huge panels that showed the same kind of imagery, but in a huge space, and allowed us to experience the works as though we were inside of them. Her mark making in various media from different viewpoints really gave us a glimpse into the migration ordeal. And it was a real pleasure to be there with Lois. So Lois, you want to continue?
Well, of course. And I realized that we had made this decision and a plan to visit Audrey's show at the very last minute. It was within a day's notice. So we really caught it at the last day, and we were really happy we did. And at the show, we realized the relevance and impact of her artistic documentation. Audrey follows a long tradition of artists who have portrayed human hardships. We can think of Goya, Kathy Kollwitz, Kentridge, Anselm Kiefer, IYY, Robert Longo, and those artists come to mind for their graphic commentaries on the human angst and suffering, along with resilient spirit. Anastasi offers a vision of the worldwide refugee phenomenon that is both timely and timeless. There is nothing new about migration, forced or voluntary. Across the ages, refugees have fled homes and homelands in a desperate attempt to find safety. We knew that here was a story that must be told, and we approached Audrey with our proposal to make an online presentation of the show for our New York Artists Circle curated show program. And thus it's become part of our archives. So we're really thrilled the show is on our website. And we wanted to offer an evening where Audrey would talk about her work. So at this juncture, I'd like to ask Audrey to tell us about her work, and I'll let her share her screen. Thank you, Audrey.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for that introduction, and thank you both for giving me this opportunity to share the work. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in, both the members of the New York Artists Circle, who were such a supportive group of artists, helping each other out, sharing information, very professional and generous group of artists. And I want to thank the people who made the effort to tune in who are not part of the Artist Circle. So, welcome to everybody and thank you very much. So I will start with my introduction of myself, which will be part of this screen share. Let's see what I can do. And Fran is going to help me if I am not perfectly attuned with my skills here, but I think we'll do pretty well. Let's go to from the beginning. Okay. So this presentation is inspired by the exhibition Refugee that Fran and Lois mentioned visiting. And we'll go down a little bit. So in terms of introducing myself, I am a practicing artist, as they said, and that is the most important aspect of the different things that I do. This is where most of my energy goes. My husband and I co-founded a gallery, so we're co-directors, co-curators. And I'm also an arts advocate. Fran mentioned that I sit on a few board of directors for arts organizations. And that's very important to me. And I have down philanthropist, which sounds a little highfalutin, but the truth is, I think any of us who put any time and attention into supporting other artists or the arts or any causes beyond ourselves is a philanthropical endeavor. And I don't think it's something that people should feel is only for some elite separate group of people. And I consider myself an educator, although I'm not teaching right now. I have in the past, and that's part of my DNA. I enjoy sharing information. And so throughout this little presentation, I will change hats, and switch points of view, because as artists, we sometimes think of things very differently than as other arts professionals. That's who I am. So as Fran mentioned, about 1990, I started painting with my non-dominant hand. So these are a couple of portraits. The one on the right was done from a photograph. I used to photograph and do my compositions photographically. And it has some symbolism in it. The gesture appears out of sort of the Western Christian tradition. The dove is symbolic, and just the character of the piece. But this was painted with my right hand, and it's about 16, 17 inches, almost square, painted oil on a board. So it's done in a very kind of traditional, almost Renaissance character, the way that it's done, layers. On the left is a portrait. It's actually half of a portrait. It's a diptych, a vertical diptych. And this is an artist by the name of Otto Niels, and he posed for me live. I did the 2 panels probably in 4 hours, maybe 5 at the most. And he just leaned against the wall. I put the paintbrush in my left hand and went to work. So that's the difference in the character. They're both very involved with observation. So the things that I'm showing you that are not from the Refugee series are pieces to kind of familiarize you with where I came from and how I came to that. So using my non-dominant left hand is part of my endeavor to foil or override my perfectionist tendencies. So I could very easily become some, paint every eyelash and get involved in that. And I actually love the intensity of working that way. But I feel like for myself, if I can sort of trick myself, the work will be a little more spontaneous and a little more from my heart. And so I'm not, I'm kind of getting beyond what I can do to where the paint takes me. So besides using my non-dominant hand, I work very, very quickly. I use oversized brushes, and I will paint with things like sticks or credit cards. I'll drag combs through the paintings, things like that. And I try to use broad strokes. And when I'm not going to show you a lot of collages, but if I do collage work, I use the paper almost as if it's a broad brush stroke, and not so much in terms of intricacy, intricately switching parts out. A lot of collage work is very delicate and very detail oriented, and my collage work is almost the opposite of that. So this is another double portrait, another vertical. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. That's interesting. Another vertical diptych, and she's a photographer by the name of Ming Smith, wonderful photographer. So now one of the other things that I did was a series of the Stations of the Cross. And I think it's important to mention these because really for two reasons. Number one, it's a series, and that's what the refugee work is. And the other thing is I used a very similar technique. Now, what I did with these is I worked on a gold substrate. I used canvases that have a gold leaf on them. And then I used black gesso. And what I did was I painted with my left hand, and I had like a damp paper towel on the right. And so working back and forth, the images would emerge. These are worked without any prior sketches. What I did was I made a list of what the different Stations of the Cross are, and I'll take a moment to tell you what that is. And then I didn't want to look at other Stations of the Cross. I wanted to work completely out of kind of a sense of what it must have felt like. So the Stations of the Cross, for those of you who don't come from a Catholic, I guess, or Episcopalian background, there are 14 specific moments in the story from when Jesus was condemned to when he was laid in the tomb. And I have an extra one because I have a close-up of Jesus's face, but which is not a really traditional part of it. But they're very specific moments. And just to say briefly, he's condemned, he takes up the cross, he falls, he meets his mother, he's helped by Simon. So each of these are always done. And if you go into a Catholic church, there's always 7 on one side, 7 on the other, and people walk the stations and they do devotions. And here's just a close-up. And when I say that I worked very loosely with this, there are things that appeared that I can't say that I consciously put in there. For instance, it kind of looks like in this painting where Jesus is meeting his mother along the way, it almost looks like a rosary bead. I didn't do that. It's just kind of how it came out, or I didn't do it consciously. And you can also, I don't know if you can see my little cursor, but you can see where the gold leaf was laid down on the substrate. So these are 12 inches by 12 inches, very humble. And this is another one where Jesus is taken down from the cross. So we see lots of paintings of that. And again, they were done very, very loosely and very much with me kind of imagining like the stretch of the arm, the limpness of Jesus being taken down, you know, the kind of knocked together humble ladder. So, and of course, now the other thing is, if you read the story, it all takes place along through a city street, and I've got them kind of in open space because just, you know, that's just how it came out of my consciousness. Here it is in a church, And you can see how tiny they are. You can see the size, you know, as they're sort of swallowed up by this grand space. And then it ended up being a book, because people who saw it said that they were saying their prayers and doing their devotions, and it was kind of like a tiger by the tail. I felt compelled to do the story for a couple of reasons. The first was that there's a great tradition of that in Western art. Many artists have done it. And I always kind of, in the back of my mind, had an idea that I might like to do it. But it's a story of betrayal, and it's a story of dignity in the face of betrayal and cruelty. And I just wanted to address that from an emotional point of view. Many Stations of the Cross that you see are very illustrative. And so it was important to me. So this series was very important as a pivotal or as a foundational series to the refugee work. Now we jump to this. What is this? Okay, I'm going to hold it up. Okay, this is a passport folio. So before my husband had the gallery, before I was a gallerist, he sold to the photographic trade. And one of the things that he sold, besides chemicals and paper and film and machines to do it all, were these folios, and the photographs that you had taken would go on this thing. You would get your picture taken, they would put them in here, and then you could safely get it home to send it to the passport company. So, or the passport agency. So the reason I'm showing you this is for a sense of scale, because these are tiny. And the other thing is, if I turn it, you can see it's got a slick surface. These are plasticized. What's significant about that? In terms of technique, when you put the paint down on it, you can move it all around like when you were a 4-year-old doing finger painting. So it's very forgiving in that way, or very interactive in that way. So this is what I was using. They're pre-printed with kind of suggestions about when you travel, about your needing your visas, your driver's license, just information about travel. And that is kind of ironically significant for the series. So here's the other side, so you can see what's printed there. And I had done a number of paintings of birch trees originally on them, because I kind of liked the way the lettering fell into the birch bark, almost like the markings of the birch bark, because the letters kind of worked with that. So I had done quite a few pieces on them of this series. And then I had done another series for an exhibition that was in a church called Misericordia. That was the name of the show, and it basically was about mercy and about connection. And so the piece on the right that you're looking at really starts to look like someone fleeing through the forest. And this was kind of leading to the series that we're going to see on the NIAC site. And here's an example of people drowning in a boat. These look like the Eritreans. Now, the other thing I do have to say is I don't present myself as an expert. These are really from the point of view of empathy, of the universals, and they were painted imagining what it must feel like, the desperation, to be wet, to be crowded, more so than, you know, giving you global statistics. This is signing the posters. The exhibition was originally supposed to happen, if you can see the date here, in March of 2020. I was signing the posters in February. Well, let me see if I can move this out of the way a little bit. Maybe I'll move that down there. And this is Michael Valentine. So Michael Valentine has a private collection, and he worked with the Brooklyn College Library to exhibit the work. So this is a project that I did with him and kind of under his, I don't know how you say it, like working with his collection. This is one of the things that he does. He likes when artists work in series, and he was interested in working together with this. And I'm very honored that I was able to work with him on this project. So it will eventually be this book. And I've been working on some of the, what do you call it? The proofs right now for the book. And I think, oh, so here's a picture of the proofs. So the representative from the printing company came, and these are the images that you'll be seeing on NIAC. And this was looking at them, you know, to evaluate the color and the character. And now here's a couple of examples. And if you recall what it looked like, this is on the side that has, here, I'll hold it up again, that has the two colors. Whoops. Yeah, it sort of wants to go away, but and so I've got opaque paint in the bottom, and I've got the darker transparent paint on the top. Here we are working again, and you can sort of see there's a little variation from one to the next. And here's another example. And the way that these were done were I put down the paint very, very loosely, and the images would start to form. Again, I've seen many photographs, but I rarely had a photograph in front of me. It was mostly kind of tapping the paint down and seeing the images kind of emerge. And when I did have the work up in Brooklyn College, they put up a board for the students to make comments, and I just copied this one commentary here. I still don't know how to get rid of this completely. But there were many, many commentaries, and it was very touching. So you can read that. You don't need me to read it. And so that's the end of our first part. And now we'll go to the actual show. I don't know if there's anything anybody wants to ask at this point.
If anyone has a question, you can unmute and ask Audrey. Otherwise, we will have question and answer afterwards.
Okay, so then I'll keep going. And so this is the show up on the New York Artist Circle. And let me get this stuff out of the way there. I think you can see a little better. And what I have to do, okay. So I'll scroll down. So I also want to say, Fran and Lois put a lot of heart and soul and time and attention, and they just organized this presentation so beautifully and so sensitively. And I really, really want to thank them for how they, how they worked with me. It was just a pleasure all the way around. So again, this is a picture of me signing. That's the banner that we used. And this just basically says it was an online iteration of the exhibition. Okay, so it ran from October of 2022 to mid-January 2023. And it was a solo show on the theme of forced migration at the library at Brooklyn College. So they only had wall space for 57 of the paintings. I did 180 of the passport size paintings. Those of you who were Jewish might know that multiples of 18 are considered high, which is and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is a word that means life. And I thought that was like the right number to do. So there's 90 verticals and 90 horizontals. It plays into the sense of art that addresses social ills, woes in the world. I don't know, but if you can bring some attention and play a tiny part in making the world a better place, there's another expression, tikkun olam, which means a small act that heals the world. So hopefully some of that is inherent in addressing this in the way that I did. So the first image shows me with the large paintings, you get a sense of scale. I did 4 of these very large panels. And so as Fran says, you are a little more immersed in it. You're a little overwhelmed by the size of it. And this shows all 4 of the large panels. And you can see it was a lovely space. It was really nice to exhibit the work there. And these are the small ones lined up. And here we are together on the day of the visit, which was a very happy day for me when they offered this opportunity. And so now we're looking at individual pieces. So the way that these were done were very similar to the Stations of the Cross in the sense that I would kind of drop a blob of paint onto these slippery cards and just kind of move things around, add and subtract back and forth until it started to resonate with a sense of the displaced people. So a lot of boats, that appear to have people with their arms up. There appears to be people in the water. This one is behind the fence and groups of people. And philosophically, there's an argument to be made for, whose story is it? Am I painting an individual who has a story? Is it my story to tell? And in a way, yes, and in a way, no. I'm going to go to sleep tonight in a comfortable home. I'm not displaced, but most of us come from families or histories where people were displaced. This one shows multitudes of people, and the top area is mostly transparent paint over the white. The bottom is the front of the passport area, so it's a darker substrate, and so I'm using opaque paint and trying to make it make sense as a unified piece. Similar over here. So, the boats take days, and people had to, be on there. I can make this a little bit bigger, I think, during the night, so I think you can see into it a little better that way. And so there are a number of themes. There's the mothers with their children, families, boats toppling over. So most of the land reminds me more of like Syria, and the displaced people there. And the boats are more like off the coast of Africa. Let me make this a little larger too. And so you can see that they're very, very loosely done, but hopefully the character of the empathy will come through. And this one, in terms of technique, in the bottom area, the fence is white paint, whereas in the top area, the fence is scratched out of dark paint. And here we have a group of women with children, people embracing. I just imagined a building backlit, people coming in for whatever processing. Not only are there people in the boats, but you see people trying to swim ashore. And again, they're really just kind of globs of paint. You just barely start to see features. And we all know the story that kind of brought attention to the crisis when a little innocent boy was, found on the beach. Continue to go through. And sometimes parts of the passport end up becoming more prominent or become a design element. Again, playing with the negative and positive space. Imagining grabbing your children and your few possessions when the day before you were sitting home at your computer with, a functioning bathroom and clean sheets. So and the multitudes are one of the themes. The fences are a theme. And this is imagining a bigger boat completely laden with people. This is imagining a tent city at night. And I think this might be sort of the end of the first area, of the first part. So I'm gonna go back to, let's see, how do I escape? Okay, so Fran, I think you wanted to say something about this, or did?
Yeah, I was just
Okay.
going to read the quote while you got set up.
Okay. And you can see it, right? We're still
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
excellent. Here,
Yes.
I'll make it a little bigger.
Phyllis Braff, a former New York Times art critic and past president of the International Association of Art Critics, wrote a whole statement about the show and about Audrey's work. And we thought this quote was particularly beautiful. Engaging with Audrey Frank Anastasi's refugee series feels both timeless and modern. Our collective knowledge of human suffering throughout the ages makes this art seem timeless, while the choice and handling of materials both deliver the message and churn emotions in a way that makes the paintings feel totally of our era. With the Refugee Project, Anastasi turns her attention to a current global crisis, the plight of displaced populations. And I thought it was so important what you said, Audrey, about the fact that, you said, well, how can I be doing this art? I'm not an immigrant myself, but so many of us are the children or the grandchildren of immigrants, and most of our families came here in similar ways, fleeing crisis and or just seeking a better life. So thank you, and continue, please.
Yes, I will. And in relation to that, I have a list of quotes, and I looked it up today to see if there was anything I particularly wanted to say, and I wasn't really thinking of it until you made your comment right now. But I have a Martin Luther King comment, and it says, "We may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now." So I thought that that was an important thing in terms of what you just said. We might not have been on the same boats coming over, but I know that I have a Jewish heritage, and I know that a lot of the Jewish boats were turned away. Or whoops, let me see. Let me try to center this a little bit better. So let's see. Okay, I'm not sure why I'm not centered a little better, but I will try. There we go. So it's the same format. These are a little bit larger.
Were you using acrylic paint in these?
Yes, so most of these are acrylic. There may be one or two that were like a water-based oil I was experimenting with, but for the most part, they are acrylic. They were easy because of the slippery surface. It was easy to work with it. I didn't have to worry about them drying up too fast for those who have worked with these materials. And some of it is very abstract. I had an image in mind for things to look like, but it didn't have to be drawn out in number 2 brushes. They're just a lot of splotches that start to read. And again, I used a lot of scratching techniques.
Another thing that struck Lois and I think was you talked about how obsessional the work was, that you did many on the same theme.
It was very obsessive, yes. And so you start to feel like you're seeing individuals, and that was kind of important to me. And the family theme was very important.
Well, how long did the project take you? More or less?
It took about 3 years to do them all. And again, just if you look closely, we're just looking at splotches of paint, but you start to see individuals, women, men with suitcases, a lot of lost souls on the beaches. This was like theoretically boxes of supplies. More people washed ashore. Again, same theme. Hordes of people just continuing to walk across the land. A foggy day, people washed ashore. Fences. You start to see faces in the fences, faces of people looking out. You start to feel like you've got a family group over here again. And that's the passport again. And the last one sort of shows how loose and washy, like this is putting paint down, and the paint sort of moves around on its own, and you can encourage to bring out things that appear to be I think I should stop my screen share, actually, if I can figure out how to do that. Oh, stop share. So that's basically it. And I hope you enjoyed seeing it. It's funny to say enjoy it because it's a sadness. But I felt compelled to do the work.
Audrey, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Beautiful show. And there was really, round of applause.
Thank you.
Lois and I were both so moved when we saw the show, and curating this felt really important to get this work out to people and let it be seen. I love, you wrote in your artist statement that art can remind us of our shared humanity. Here are individuals worlds apart in origin, yet just like ourselves. They love and laugh, suffer and face adversity, raise children and work, help each other, and seek to rebuild. And that feeling really comes through in the work. We would like to open it up to questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Extraordinary show, Audrey. Really, I'm bowled over every time I see the work.
Thank you.
And so a couple of things. One is, when you were doing the actual work, how did you play around with the sort of abstract shapes? Were you holding the passport and kind of letting it flow one way or other? Did you sort of push it around with a brush? I think you described it a little, but I was just curious in a little more detail.
Well, both of those things, all of the above. I basically worked standing up over a table, and sometimes I would work maybe on 2 or 3 of them at a time. So I would let some of it puddle, and I would do exactly what you said. I would pick it up and sort of let the paint like roll around and become clouds or become water, and use a brush, use a credit card to sort of push the paint around. And sometimes I had an idea that I was going like for a boat or a group of people, but sometimes I just put a glob of paint on this slippery surface and started pushing it around till I started seeing something, almost like if you look at clouds and you look for and you start to see an animal or something like that. Very, very organic kind of process.
Yeah, and I love the way the juxtaposition of that with even the words that come up from the passport and kind of come into the forefront and becomes a whole another level of the meaning.
Right.
So
Well, it's very interesting that you brought that up, because that's very important. So these are people that had to, like I say, one day they're sitting at their computer, they've got a life, they've got a job, they've got clean clothes, and they got to go. They got to pick up their babies and leave. They don't have their documentation, they don't have their papers. We have passports when we travel for work, when we travel for pleasure, when we travel for education, any number of reasons. We have our papers. These are undocumented people, and this is part of sort of the political controversy, but what could they do? And so painting this on a theoretical passport substrate becomes an irony, because these people did not have a chance to get anything, sort out any of their personal documentation and put things in order. So, we all depend on that. I mean, imagine if, you lose track of your bank account, or you lose track of your driver's license, and, the red tape. I mean, that's all over the world.
I love that irony, and I love the irony that each of those passports, they say, have a good trip or have a great trip.
Right.
Exactly.
So my other question was, now that you've immersed yourself in this and produced this beautiful body of work and beautifully meaningful, do you feel like you explored every aspect of that you would like to, or are you still immersed in this and you haven't been able to think about it, or do you envision continuing something along these lines and in this direction?
I kind of feel like this is a complete body, although I may use the subject matter, but not as a whole series again. I don't believe. I think this is complete as it is. I'm doing a little bit of work now, sort of thinking about a different form of destruction. I don't know whether it's going to be as visual, but the earthquake and how long it, literally what an upheaval that is. And I've done a little bit of work addressing that, but that's so abstract that I don't know whether it will have the emotional content. I mean, I think that these grabbed an emotional content, that it just really came out. So yes, I may paint more boats and I may paint more groups of people, but I don't think it would be quite the same. I think this is kind of a body of work that is kind of completed at this point.
Thank you.
I don't know, Pearl, did you have a question? You want to unmute?
Audrey, is just incredible work.
Thank you.
This was, of all weeks that we should, you plan this this Zoom, for it to be this week, when every day on television we're marking how many immigrants are coming in. I mean, it just was like, it just filled the air, and then here's the work.
Right.
So that the timing on this was amazing. And the thing that I felt seeing your work, I mean, it is, you have the imagery, which is so powerful, which just evolved out of each page. They just came, they emerged. And this is an example of when an artist is so in a flow, when they're so tied into the imagery, and that imagery just emerges. And there was so much of this work that it happened again and again. And it's such an incredible process, when any of us are in that flow. But to see you do this, and to see the example, and each and every one of these so emotional, each little dot becoming something. It isn't that you dictated it, it's that it emerged. And it's just a fabulous process.
Right. Well, that was very exciting for me too, to observe that.
Do you think you will put this on display in your gallery?
It's not mine anymore. The project is part of this private collection that Michael Valentine put together.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's why he's doing the book too.
Oh,
So it's
boy.
a standalone project, and I'm hoping that it'll travel and it'll find some other places to
Oh,
be
yeah.
displayed.
Great.
Of course,
yeah.
I'll share that information if it goes anywhere. I'm hoping that eventually it will.
Yeah,
Has
that'd be
shared-
exciting to have it travel to other museums,
Right. Right.
not just in this country, but throughout the world.
Yeah, it would be wonderful.
Yes, I
Yeah.
wish you luck with that. Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you.
And other colleges, other museums, there's so many
Right.
venues that this could work so well in.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I celebrate you. I'm so proud
Thank
of you.
Thank you.
This is really important work.
I really appreciate that, because I know your work very well, and I know your singular ability to like look out and see the lights and the darks, and there's a lot of life and emotion in your landscapes, even when they're very quiet and very gentle. They grab you on an emotional level. So
Oh,
it means a
thank
lot that you like the work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh.
Does Mr. Valentine take into consideration that what you wish to have happen with the work? Like, are you, as the witness of this experience, of the notion of refugee, does he feel you're part of the work after you finished it? I mean, does he think about what you'd like to see?
Yeah. I mean, we're pretty like-minded on it. Yeah, I think so. I think we're pretty much in harmony about it. So, yeah.
So your suggestions might be something he would work on, possibly, whatever. See.
Any other questions?
I also would like to refer to the passport image, because I found it extraordinarily powerful, Audrey, to include that in your work. And, because it just raises the question of who is allowed to come into this country, or any country for that matter, who's a refugee. And I think, it's always been very selective. And now especially, like, who gets to decide and who comes in. And, it's always been very narrowly defined as to who's considered an acceptable person and who's not, and often that's based on their income or their race. And obviously very few refugees end up being allowed in, and it's gotten much worse, certainly got worse under Trump, and it's still pretty hard for most people to get accepted here. And I think the same is true in many European countries. So, I think that the passport stamp on them was just incredibly powerful, because that decision about who's allowed in and who isn't is just so much part of this conversation. So,
Right. Well, one of the things, one of the sad things is that this is probably a universal issue that will continue going forward. There have been, people have had to flee and be refugees all throughout history. And when I mean, it's very much on people's minds in the United States, and depending upon where you are on the political spectrum, it's almost a decision of where on the timeline you decide, when you get, like in the United States, like, what's a true American? Well, it depends what date you pick.
Exactly. Who gets to?
And so these are very open-ended discussions, and it's a moving target, and we have on the Statue of Liberty, we're supposed to be taking the tired and the poor and the downtrodden, and that was what we were proud of for so many years. And now it's become a little bit of a hot button, polarized issue, which is really unfortunate. And I actually don't understand all of our political, even what the extremes want or don't want in our country. I'm not sure. But
I mean, to qualify as a refugee, you have to prove that you're fleeing war, that your life is at stake,
right,
which is a different classification than being allowed to come in as an immigrant who gets legal status. So there's
Right.
variations, but I guess the question I want to ask you is, were there visual images that you were seeing that influenced how you created these works? And were you drawing also from stories that you were hearing on the news, and just kind of your influences here?
Yeah, I mean, I would see like broadcast news and boats and um and it's certainly influenced, and you're seeing people huddled and wrapped up and in the water, and you see boats with people pouring off of them, and then you see people coming over the horizon with all these whatever they could grab. And so that's the imagery that came in. And going into black and white is almost like reportage in a way. It's almost like news photographs to work in the limited palette, because that's abstract, actually. The people used to say, oh, do you dream in color? Well, I would think so, because black and white is a photographic process, and before there was photographs, everything was in color. So using the black and white kind of plays into that idea of it being in the news, it being something that we are made conscious of from day to day if we're trying to keep up with what's going on in the world. And there's a sobriety or a somberness or a gravitas that you see with black and white more than if you see things in color, I think.
I totally agree.
So anyway, I want to thank everybody, and thank you for your questions too.
Thank you all for coming and being here for this talk and this show. Thank you, Audrey, so much for the work. Lois, thank you for being a wonderful co-curator and keeping our project moving along. So
Nice to you. Okay.
Well, I can't thank you all enough. I really can't. Thank you very, very much for putting this together, for those of you who are attending. I really appreciate it. It means a lot.
The one thing that we didn't do, although I have a feeling everyone who's here knows this already, I didn't put the email, the website address of the show in the chat. So I'm doing that right now, but
Okay.
it was in the email, and I think
it was in the people that were invited in, and the circle knows. So yeah, and it's very, and the show remains kind of in an archive too. So
right.
I appreciate that. That means a lot. And now I'll be a little bit of the gallerist, and no, this is speaking as an artist too. I always encourage artists to do things like take installation shots, because a lot of heart and soul goes into presentations and putting your artwork into a show. And then when it's down, it's gone, and there's an empty space that doesn't have your work in it anymore. But the documentation lives on. So if you have some nice installation shots when you had a show, it's a very nice thing. And so I do encourage artists to do that.
That is excellent advice.
Until June 1st, it'll be the prime first show that you see, but it's archived, and it will be a show you can get to just underneath the new show on June 1st. So it's always there. You'll find it.
And always at the direct link that I put in the chat, or that is in the email. So
thanks very much.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Fran and Lois, too. Wonderful curation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all.
Bye, everybody.